right. Senator Duckworth, thank you so much for joining us, opening your time for us. I know you're very busy, and especially in the last couple months, you had a bill that was sponsored, that you sponsored that had passed the Senate about a couple months ago, the Water Infrastructure and Wastewater Act. Um, just kind of talk a little bit about that. And what's the goal? What's the overall goal of that bill?
To make real significant investments in our water infrastructure. What has happened in this country is that we have not made any federal investments. If you look into like the 1970 timeframe, 1970, 1971, the federal government's share of water infrastructure projects was over 60%, was like over 65%, I think. By 2017, that number had dropped down to something like 9%. So what that meant was that smaller municipalities, rural municipalities that had smaller population bases, and impoverished municipalities, sometimes those are urban ones, just couldn't fix their water infrastructure because they didn't have the base in order to raise the funds to do this. And so we got to a place where our status quo in this country is that basically millions of Americans are served drinking water, what's, for example, essentially a lead straw. I mean, we have 23% of the nation's lead piping in the Chicagoland area, in Illinois, and most of it is in the Chicagoland area, but it's also in rural communities. We have wastewater issue all over the country, I mean, both rural and urban. And then also, we've never addressed the issue of language that included in any water water legislation that actually included native or tribal lands as qualifying for these grants, and then also rural communities. So language that had to do with well water. If you're on well water, you should be able to get some help there as well. And so that's why it was bipartisan, and it passed unanimously out of committee, and pretty darn close to unanimously out of the Senate as well. I think only like 15 people voted against it.
And from the numbers I got, yeah, I think it was like 89-2 or something along those lines.
89-2, okay.
But it seems like the country is very overdue for an overhaul. I mean, is it?
Very much so. I mean, what people don't realize is that a significant portion of our population is still getting drinking water, for example, through pipes that are lead pipes. They've just had a coating, a protective coating sprayed on the inside of those pipes so that the lead doesn't leach into the water. What happened in Flint, Michigan was that they switched their water source from a municipal water source to the Flint River, which was more acidic, and the Flint River water actually eroded that lining away, and that's how the lead got into the water supply. This is something that potentially could be happening anywhere in the country. And so it was just really significant that we deal with this. Our kids, I mean, public schools right now, a lot of public schools have had to shut down the drinking water fountains so that, kids can't even get a drink of water in school. It's ridiculous that we are the wealthiest nation in the world. We're competing with the likes of Japan and Germany, and yet we can't even trust the water that comes out of our taps.
And a few weeks ago, you did an interview with David Rubenstein about this subject, talking about how you hope that there's going to be a little bit more GOP support, and that you're willing to make it more bipartisan, but you're also willing to vote on it without GOP support. What's been the status update with GOP support? Has the bill generated more interest from people in the GOP?
Well, this bill passed the Senate. The water and wastewater and drinking water infrastructure bill passed the Senate. The overall Americans Jobs Plan, which is the infrastructure plan that includes roads, rail, bridges, transportation infrastructure, that is the one that will include a lot of the provisions of my water bill, but that's the larger one. We're waiting to hear. I mean, we're waiting to hear what the GOP comes up with. The president's plan, infrastructure plan, was well over $2 trillion. And by the way, the American Society of Civil Engineers has said for years we need to make at least a 1.5 trillion investment in our nation's just basic transportation infrastructure, roads, rail, bridges, airports also. That's just 1.5 trillion to get it from a D- to a C grade. That's not counting the water infrastructure or any other infrastructure, locks and dams on the Mississippi, for example, ports. And the GOP proposal was like 800 800 billion, I mean, not even a trillion. So there's a real breakdown. There's a long way to go between the two sides. I'm waiting to see what the GOP comes back with. I mean, the president, last thing the White House did was they took broadband out of they proposed to remove broadband out of the bill that the president had. And, you know, we have 20 million households in this country that doesn't have broadband. And, you know, we learned during COVID how vital that is for our kids. And for people who have to suddenly telecommute, but they can't go to work because they don't have broadband, or our kids can't go to school. And so, you know, we've already had to take that out of the bill. And the GOP negotiators still rejected it.
Let's switch gears now to something that just happened recently. The U.S. just sent about 750,000 doses of the COVID-19 vaccine to Taiwan, which is struggling to contain the pandemic. Only 3% of its 23 million plus people have received some sort of vaccine. First off, do we know which vaccines Taiwan is getting?
So we've not yet sent the vaccines. We have committed to the initial tranche of 750,000 vaccines. It's either going to be, I think, Moderna or Johnson & Johnson. I don't know. I personally don't know what the decision has been. And it's going to go through the COVAX system, which is the international community's way of getting vaccines to nations. And what you should realize about Taiwan was that they actually have had they've done a good job of controlling COVID-19, especially early on. And they did such a good job that they sent PPE to the United States to help us when we were having problems with getting our hands on PPE, but they had their COVID under control. Now what's happened is recently they've had an outbreak happen. At the same time, they had already contracted to buy vaccines from Moderna and from other places, but the PRC, the Communist Chinese government, has been blocking them from getting access to vaccines. So they're the only nation in the world that the PRC is basically blockading from the vaccine. And the PRC is also, because they're part of the COVAX system, blockading that system as well. So it's really important for the United States to show up and say, you know what, we're going to stand beside you, Taiwan. You are our friend, and we're going to make sure you get vaccines. So combined with the 750,000 from the United States and the 1.25 million from Japan, they're going to get a total of 2 million vaccines. The Japanese have delivered theirs already. And then the Biden administration is right now working on getting the 750,000 that they've committed to Taiwan.
And this is, a curious event too, just because of the history that China and Taiwan have. China still thinks that it is that Taiwan is part of the People's Republic of China, even though it's still technically the ROC. How could this donation convolute the U.S. relationship with China? Because China may not be happy with these donations coming from Japan or from the U.S. to Taiwan. How does this does that relationship?
Yeah, it clearly does not make the Communist Chinese very happy. But frankly, we've had a strong alliance with the Taiwan government for a very long time now. And this is a region of shared importance. They are our friends in the region who are trying to make sure there's freedom of navigation through the Taiwanese Straits, for example. And again, bottom line, we're in the middle of a humanitarian crisis and a global pandemic. And the Communist Chinese are actually trying to blockade the population of Taiwan from vaccines that they were buying themselves. It's not like they were out asking people to give them vaccines. They were trying to buy, and the Chinese government was trying to blockade Taiwan in the middle of a pandemic. So it's really important that the United States and other allies step up to help the people of Taiwan fight this pandemic, especially after the Taiwanese helped us out without us even having to ask for it at a time when we couldn't get enough respirators or PPE. They sent them to us.
And Taiwan recently just went up 20 spots in the democracy index this past year. So Taiwan's it's got its own reputation going on. It's its own little power. It's its own power, And real quick too, one of the last things I wanted to talk to you about was about the recently signed into law, the COVID-19 hate crimes bill, passed bipartisan for the most part. There was only one senator that voted against it, which was Missouri's Josh Hawley. Here in Illinois, one House representative voted against it, and that was Mary Miller. Um, this is obviously important to the 15 House reps, 2 senators, and 1 vice president that is of Asian descent, and to many others of Asian descent across the country. What's your reaction to those who voted to oppose this legislation that tries to respond to the rising attacks against Asian Americans since the start of the pandemic?
Well, I'd say just look at who voted against it. One who's a QAnon conspiracy, far right wing, conspiracy follower, and Josh Hawley, who helped, support the insurrectionists on January 6th. Everybody else certainly recognize that it's wrong to commit acts of violence against somebody because of their race. And that Asian American, Native Hawaiian, and Pacific Islanders should receive the same protection as any other group from being targeted for hate crimes. And this bill actually does very benign things like ask the Justice Department to take a look and make sure that we are not underreporting hate crimes, that we have a program to help police forces identify hate crimes when they're committed against AAPIs in particular. And so, it's astonishing, but not surprising who has voted against it. But I'm so pleased that it was so vastly bipartisan in its passage from both the House and the Senate, and that the president was able to sign it into law almost immediately.
And anything else that you wanted to add, Senator Duckworth?
It's just great to be on. I hope everybody's getting out and about once you've been vaccinated. And if you haven't, go get vaccinated. It means you're gonna be able to travel again, do all sorts of things. I just came from my daughter's kindergarten graduation, and we were able to do it in person because everybody had been vaccinated. And even though the children are too young to be vaccinated because all the adults were, and we were able to still have, this rite of passage for my little girl. And I hope that families all across Illinois and all across our nation can enjoy those moments again. And it's really thanks to the vaccine and thanks to the American Rescue Plan that Democrats voted for.
It was certainly peculiar when I walked into a gas station that there was no mask sign and nobody wearing masks. It kind of felt like it was 2019.
Yeah, well, you'll see me still wearing my mask because, again, I have a 6-year-old and a 3-year-old who can't be vaccinated. So, I want to make sure that I protect them. But yes, I think it's wonderful that people can do that again once they're vaccinated.
All right. Well, congrats on your daughter's graduation. And Senator, thank you so much for joining us for 10 minutes of your time. And hopefully we can get together soon and talk some more. Okay.
Thanks. Good to be on. Thanks.